Welcome to this presentation and thank you for your interest in this research. In the next 25 minutes, I will be summarizing the academic research that I have conducted in the last 8 years on a part-time basis about the role of self-directed learning within personal development plan practice in supporting the undertaking of learning activities and job performance. I will first introduce the context of this research. Then I will be going through the outcome of each study, but also explain how each study builds upon the previous one and complements it by taking into account both their results and limitations. Finally, I will conclude with practical implications of the overall research project, as well as limitation and suggestion for future research. If you ask people about their working environment today, this is one picture that they could use to describe it. Today's workplaces are undergoing massive and rapid changes due to different macro socioeconomic factors, including globalization and competitiveness, the rapid development of information and communication technologies, the growth of the service sector, and an aging workforce. In this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, talented employees are the best assets of organizations. They are the one that will bring individual job performance and competence to the organization that will enable the organization to strive and stay ahead of the competition. Organizations use different strategies, processes, and tools to foster individual job performance and competency development. This research is about PDP, one of the tools they use that is usually part of a broader talent and performance management tools and processes. A PDP is defined as an assessment tool embedded in a larger assessment cycle of development and appraisal interviews used to gather and document information about the competencies the employee has worked on and is planning to further develop. A PDP has different characteristics. First, it is composed by the employee himself or herself using self-direction, although the format is provided by the organization. Secondly, it forms the basis for and is used to structure developmental conversation. These conversations are usually happening with the employee's supervisor or people managers who provides the employee with feedback and stimulates employee reflection around learning. Finally, it serves different decision-making processes. Usually, these are related to learning, for example, attending a training program. As a PDP is composed by the employee, they will need to possess certain qualities and understand the process to build their PDP, something that is nicely summarized as self-directed learning. Self-directed learning is a concept that has attracted growing attention from the academic research in the last 50 years. It can be understood in two ways. First, as a process in which individuals take the initiative with or without the help of others in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating learning goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategy, and evaluating learning outcomes. It can also be understood as a personal characteristic. A learner's set of personal attributes or traits such as initiative, independence, and persistence in learning, which can be assessed through scales and have led to many quantitative studies. A self-directed learner will create their own learning path within a PDP that leverages any learning opportunity available in the workplace through a learning strategy as Knowles describes it. There are two main types of learning activities in the workplace. Formal learning activities are all learning activities that take place within a formally designated learning context, such as a training session. Informal learning activities have often been defined in contrast to formal learning activities for a lack of a consensual definition. They include learning from oneself, for example, reflecting on ways to improve performance, learning from others, for example, learning from a mentor, and learning from non-interpersonal sources, for example, learning from searching for job-related information on the internet. PDPs help with informal learning activities. It makes them more explicit, intentional, and conscious. Within this research, we explore how PDP can best maximize the effectiveness of learning strategy, that is, the choice of informal and formal learning activities for creating a learning path related to a learning goal. With our research, we have formalized these contextual elements as variables based on existing academic research, and we have explored through different studies how they interact with each other. The starting point for the first study was twofold. First, it builds upon existing doctoral research from Beausaert, conceptualizing PDP practice and consequences, which left room for further research. For example, the diversification of the sectors included. Within this first research, we include public sector and medical industry as research sectors. Second, on the fact that SDL as a personal characteristic could represent a factor increasing PDP effectiveness, as people demonstrating SDL, self-directed learning, could, for example, better recognize learning opportunities. Therefore, our first studies explored this relationship from three perspectives, with the following research questions. First, does PDP practice relate to the undertaking of learning activities and perceived performance? Then, does employee self-directedness as a personal characteristic relate to the undertaking of learning activities and perceived performance? Finally, to what extent does self-directedness as a personal characteristic moderate the relationship between PDP practice and the undertaking of learning activities and perceived performance? The moderating role of SDL explore how SDL changes the relationship between PDP practice and outcome variables previously studied. The main results of this study were the following. First, a significant positive relationship between SDL as a personal characteristic and undertaking of learning activities and personal and perceived performance. Nevertheless, we found out that SDN only moderates the relationship between learning and reflection and instruction and feedback components of personal development plans, practice, and employees' perceived performance. And we could only partially replicate the results showing that PDP practice was positively related to perceived performance and undertaking of learning activities. This led us to reconsider the role of SDL. With study 2, we moved from a moderating role of SDL on PDP practice to a mediating role within PDP practice, placing SDL at the core of PDP practice. Also, to complement the research on SDL, we tested SDL as a process. Taking into account the limitation of study 1 that used self-reported performance measurement, we also used a more objective performance measurement, job performance, which included both task performance and competencies development as subcomponents, highlighting the importance of what performance is achieved, but also how it was achieved in alignment with company strategy and values. Job performance was also measured with multiple ratings from employees and people managers. Finally, it made the distinction between the undertaking of informal and formal learning activities as components of the learning strategy within SDL as a process. The research question for this study considered what is the role of employees' self-directed learning process when using a PDP for job performance. From a methodological perspective, this research used a quasi-longitudinal design and further extends research sectors, including financial sector. The second study confirmed that employee exercising a self-directed learning process within PDP practice will demonstrate higher task performance and competency development if they define learning goals and link them to the competencies and choose an appropriate learning strategy for their learning goals. Within this strategy, increasing the number of learning activity, especially informal learning activities, will lead to better job performance. Yet, this study had some limitation that we will explain in this overall diagram that is showing how the different studies included in this research project complement each other. First, study 2 did not include motivational variable in the SDL model, although they were highlighted as important in the literature on SDL. This led us to use an integrated model of SDL for study 3, the Pro-SDL model from Stockdale and Brockett, which includes both SDL as a personal characteristic and SDL as a process, as well as motivational variables. Also, as results from study 2 stressed the importance of learning strategy, we explored further the learning strategies by differentiating the types of informal learning activities with NEWS model. Finally, with this research, we complemented the overall research model by considering antecedents of SDL within PDP practice. In the workplace, the role of people managers is key. They are the ones who represent the voice of the company and they interact with employees on a daily basis. By using autonomy supportive behavior, they should foster employees' self-directedness as per the self-determination theory. Autonomy support is an interpersonal behavior provided by an individual to create a sense of responsibility in learners that enhances intrinsic motivation. In the workplace, it involves the supervisor understanding and acknowledging the employee's perspective, providing meaningful information in a non-manipulative manner, offering opportunities for choice, and encouraging self-initiation. The research question for study 3 were those perceived autonomy support relate to the undertaking of both formal and informal learning activities at the workplace, and those self-direction in learning, SDL as a process and as a personal characteristic, when using a personal development plan, mediates the relationship between perceived autonomy support and the undertaking of formal and informal learning activities. Results of study 3 showed a partial mediation model, confirming the mediation role of SDL when using a PDP between autonomy support and the undertaking of learning activities. In this model, autonomy support was positively related to informal learning, but not to formal learning. At the same time, it confirmed that perceived autonomy support is significantly positively related to three components of SDL when using a PDP. Finally, only some components of SDL relate to significantly positively to the undertaking of informal and formal learning activities. Finally, with study 4, we considered the full research model, but by using a qualitative design. Among others, it explored the learning strategies from a qualitative perspective, but it also looked at the confirming and complementing the research model by using both a deductive and an inductive approach. Finally, it further extends research sector by including non-governmental organizations. The research questions for study 4 were: what is the role of autonomy supportive manager in supporting employees' self-directed learning when making use of a PDP? And what is the role of self-directed learning within PDP practice for undertaking of formal and informal learning activities and job performance? With the deductive approach, we confirmed the added value of the research model. For example, participants stressed that PDP creates a humanitarian corridor for personal and professional development in the workplace, and complemented the existing research model, for example, by putting forward the importance of learning from work-related situation, which was not included in NEWS model of informal learning. With the inductive approach, participants also insisted on the role of people managers, and this role was to provide structure to complement autonomy support. While this dual role had already been put forward in educational sector within the framework of the SDT, the self-determination theory, it is new in the workplace learning theories. This means that to balance autonomy supportive behaviors, managers need, among others, to push their employees outside their comfort zone, agree on learning goals, and provide constructive feedback. The second main result of the inductive research relate to the relevance of adding, according to participants, the 7 dimensions of the learning organization to contextual variables. Elements included in this theory, developed by Marsick and Watkins, insist, for example, on the importance of encouraging collaboration and team learning and creating systems to capture and share learning. Outcome of this thesis could be particularly interesting for human resources professionals who have implemented or are looking to implement personal development plan in their organization. They will find evidences that PDP practice has a positive effect on both undertaking of formal and informal learning activities, as well as job performance. Results also highlight the added value of the PDP, which creates a humanitarian corridor for personal and professional development, opening up the dialogue and feedback around learning goals, as well as focusing employees on long-term learning goals. At the same time, for successful implementation, they will need to pay attention to several success factors. At an organizational level, they should provide appropriate chances for learning and reflection. It means that L&D time should be allocated for both working on the PDP with their manager, but also completing learning activities. Also, they should formalize processes for PDP and train people managers and employees to use these processes. Thirdly, they should develop SDL skills of employees and support the development of autonomy support and structure-related behaviors for people manager. Finally, they should implement the 7 dimension of the learning organization from Marsick and Watkins model. From a managerial perspective, they should recommend that managers take into account individual differences when supporting employees learning with PDPs, including their level of self-directedness, as well as their need for autonomy support and structure. From an individual perspective, they should develop the understanding and assess levels of SDL as a personal characteristic and SDL skills from employees. And they should also develop the understanding of different ways in which employees can define a learning strategy within a PDP. While some of the limitation and suggestion of future research have already been taken into account in building the overall research project, as a study complemented and built upon each other, some limitations related mainly to study 3 and 4, but also the broader research project should be taken into account for conducting future research. Before doing this, I want to take a critical perspective on PDP practice by nuancing the added value that they bring. First, while we research different organizational sectors, we apparently focused on knowledge worker in knowledge-intensive jobs with higher level of education. PDP could therefore be a tool that enables the rich to become richer, in the sense that those who are most used to learn because they have a learning intensive job or high level of education would be the one that benefit most of PDP. Also, our research model places SDL at the heart of PDP practice. This way of considering the individual actor as the center of the learning process in the workplace could be a bias of countries with individualistic national cultures. In the same logic, we could also relate criticism of contemporary sociologists who denounce this new spirit of capitalism by questioning the choice an employee could have in taking the responsibility of their own learning. Faced with constant changes and restructuring, as well as demands for productivity, flexibility, and mobility, they have actually no choice but to motivate themselves to remain employable and not to lose their job. On top of these more broader limitations, some limitations were related to variable measurements. We had high data attrition in study 2 and self-reported data in study 3. We used also different measurement of undertaking learning activities in study 1, 3, and 4, but it was included only as a subcomponent of SDL as a process in study 2. This inconsistency in measuring learning activities echoes a discussion in the workplace learning literature, who argue against making such a distinction between formal and informal learning. Aside from this, time available for working on PDP, although highlighted as playing a role in study 1 and 2, was not measured in subsequent studies. Given its importance in PDP literature, it could be considered as a variable influencing PDP effectiveness. Also, some limitations were related to sampling and research design. We only researched participants using PDP in study 2 and 3, and ask only for volunteers in study 4. On top of this, while we strove to include different sectors, it seems that we focused more on white-collar workers in knowledge-intensive jobs and individualistic cultures. Finally, we only used one integrated model of SDL, while there exist other in the literature that should be tested and compared. This being said, I want to conclude on the relevance of continued research on SDL within PDP. Indeed, talent management systems are increasingly being used, and they include PDPs. They are increasingly being used in larger but also smaller organizations. PDP also becomes a regulatory requirement in some countries. As we have seen, finally, employees and people managers in the workplace also see its added value. So further research is welcome. Based on the current research, we would recommend to conduct experimental research using intervention with a longitudinal design and to conduct this research in different sectors and culture. This research should leverage the existing model that we have built through this research project while considering to add new variables such as autonomy, support, and structure, the 7 dimensions of the learning organization, and time spent using PDP. I really thank you for listening to this presentation, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me would you have any question regarding this research project.